So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Dr. Joy Abuajapong. I'm the seminar coordinator at CSPS, and I welcome all of you to today's seminar. This is the first for the semester, and we are going to have a presentation by Professor Maxwell Opoku. But before we start, kindly note that we are recording the session and we will post it on our YouTube channel. So by way of introduction, Dr. Maxwell Peprah Opoku is an assistant professor in special education at the United Arab Emirates University. He holds a PhD in education from the University of Tasmania. And then prior to that, he worked as a casual academic teaching undergraduate and graduate courses at the Faculty of Education, University of Tasmania. So he's very experienced in studies on special education, and he's passionate about research on autism, Down syndrome, intellectual disability, and similar topics. So Dr. Maxwell Peprah Opoku, you're welcome to our seminars, and we invite you to do our presentation for 30 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A for another 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity. And it's always good to speak to our own people, and I do welcome all those who are present today. So it will just be some sort of a conversation, because like it's time for us to have conversation regarding how we are practicing inclusive education in Ghana. So I'll just take you through some few things that I've done in the past, and also some of the, based on my experience and what I've done so far, where I think we should focus on, or we should pay attention to, if we are really interested in what implementation of what inclusive education. So I'll go through my presentation following these guidelines, just talk about something about inclusive education, and also just give an idea about what the current state of what implementation, and also the policy direction, and also the just a brief conclusion. So nowadays, in terms of education globally, inclusive education has become a trend, and everybody is speaking about it. So it's just become like a global language, whereby people are really looking at that. So when you talk about the implementation, we have we take it from two major perspectives. So I'll cover the two perspectives and also link it up to where our focus has been as a country in Ghana, and also in most countries, where how we are practicing inclusion. So we have the two roles, which is what the narrow perspective and also the broad perspectives, and whereby ENSCO and also the earlier developers think that when we talk about inclusion, it should focus on all minority groups, not only students with disabilities, but all minority groups, which includes orphans. In Australia, they do expand that to what students whose first language is not English. They do classify them under or they do place those students within inclusive programs. So in that category, we talk about so many different minority groups, for those who are not from a background where English is not spoken, refugees, and all these different groups comes under the broad definition. And also we have the narrow scope, whereby we do focus on children with disabilities. And I think that in Ghana, the moment you mention the term inclusion, the attention goes to those people know that what you're talking about, children who are having disabilities. But the argument is that, and I had a chance to spend time with Professor Ume Sharma, and they do believe that children with disabilities are always difficult to work with. So if we we limit the practice to children with disabilities, teachers who are teaching those particular groups will be able to support all other children that they do encounter. So based on, so according to them, we need to have a narrow focus, and based on a narrow focus, the teachers will be able to look at that. There are back and forth discussion on whether we should go with a narrow perspective or whether we should go with a broad perspective. But when it comes to Ghana, we do, although the inclusive policy do have different categories, but when you go to the field and you talk to the teachers, as soon as you mention inclusion, they talk about what disability or children who are having what disability. Recently, and I think I was working on a project on religion, and we do realize that what religion play a fundamental role in our understanding of disability. So if we are going through or we are looking at what the narrow perspective, this is one area that we really need to look at, that our understanding of disability is informed by what our religious practices. And we found out that in Ghana, most people are Christians, but within those individuals, they still have what the traditional understanding of what, or the traditional understanding of disabilities still influence what our practice. So in one way, I think this perspective, or we did not tackle this problem before what we attempt to and I'll come back to this particular point, why and how it's having an impact on what on our current practice, why we are not able to practice inclusion. So we know that formally the inclusive education started in Ghana during the 2004 academic year. So the idea was that by 2015, they will roll out the whole project. So within the 10-year period, it was just a pilot, or it was what they were just piloting the project with the intention of what rolling out the project in 2015. But during the period, we realized that after 2015, nowadays we don't speak much about or we don't know what is happening within the inclusive policies. And I'm going to talk about the reason why maybe we are although on paper it exists that we are practicing inclusive education, but when you go to the field, maybe it's not felt as much as compared to maybe between 2004 and 2015, where there was support for practice. But after that, nowadays you can see that people do not really speak about inclusive education. Now let's pick some specific aspects. What is disability in Ghana? And you can look at so many documents. We don't really define what. In many countries, like in Australia, they have a national definition for disability. And in most countries, they do come up with some of these clarity in terms of who is considered as having a disability. It's difficult to find some of these documents, but when you look at the recent census, this is how they captured they define disability as people who cannot walk, who cannot see, who cannot hear, and who cannot take care of themselves, and also who cannot communicate. But personally, I do believe that if you define disability in this particular way, it's not really we don't really capture, or some groups are going to be left behind, and some particular groups are not going to be captured. And most often we do have a situation whereby maybe we do have a situation whereby some of the disability groups, they cross, or some people may be having one particular disability, but rather they will have other characteristics as we've identified in our policy. So clearly you can see that there are some fundamental problems that we are going to have when you speak about implementing inclusive education. So as a country, if we do not have, or if we define disability in this particular way, and the census, maybe the census data is going to stay with us in the next 10 years. So which means that everybody is going to fall on this data. But clearly, right from the beginning, you know that there's some particular individuals are not going to be captured within our definition of disability. So, and I think maybe I'll come back to in my conclusion, I'll talk about some of these particular issues and how it's going to have impact on what our ability to make an impact or our ability to implement a policy such as what inclusive education. So in practicing inclusive education and looking at the narrow focus, there are other things that we also have to consider, because when you look at the WHO community-based rehabilitation matrix, they try to look at 5 areas. So if you are implementing any policy, those policies should have what should consider the health needs of persons with disability, education, the livelihood, and social empowerment. So within all these things, maybe in trying to maybe develop an inclusive policy, there's the need for us to consider each one of these key components that will have impact on us. Although we're talking about education, but within education, there's always the health need, because disability also have intersect with the health needs of those particular individuals. And also, you cannot leave out the livelihood. So there is the need for us to also talk about that. But clearly, you can clearly see that when you go to our schools, we've not really worked on developing workforce in terms of let's say allied health professional, like in most countries now. Here in the UAE, they have a requirement that every school should have a school nurse, every school should have a speech language pathologist, every school should have this. But you can see that within our school systems, some of these other areas or other professions that should also be in the school, we don't have it, or they are not available. So we are only target, our policies are maybe looking at one particular aspect without considering all the other important domains that can also have an impact on the children with disabilities. So we need to give an account of where we are now, or some of the issues that has emerged from studies that have been done in Ghana when it comes to the implementation of inclusive education. So the major thing is that there are complex barriers, or most of the studies that you see in Ghana will cover some key barriers that are affecting our implementation of inclusive education. And the first one, they come to the teachers. Yes, UCC, Unibar, colleges of education now, which have been transformed to universities, they do train teachers in this in special education, or they have a course in special education, special education, maybe they call it Introduction to Special Needs, whereby all teachers take this particular course. But other people believe that maybe they take just one course, so because of that, maybe the teachers do not have enough, or they don't get enough training within the schools. But maybe regardless of the course that they are taking in the schools, in practice, when you talk to the teachers, in most instances, in most of the studies, you find out that they do believe that they are not ready to support the teaching of children with disability. And one thing I've noticed over the years is that when you are discussing the implementation of inclusive education with teachers, the policy, they support it. But when it comes to practice, that is where they will tell you that they are not ready to be able to support the teaching of children who are having disabilities. And over the years, there was a time whereby I was having some interviews with some of the officials from the Ministry of Education, and you notice that the teachers do not have any professional development specifically in inclusive education, although they have budget for other STEM and other areas in literacy and all that. So specifically on inclusive education, they don't have there's the absence of any professional development that is being given to the teachers. And I think I'll revisit this issue, and also maybe when towards the end of my presentation. Another big problem is funding. And when you talk to teachers, or when you are trying to talk to teachers or schools, you realize that they don't receive any funding for implementation of inclusive education. And when you trace the history of inclusive education, you find out that between 2004 and 2015, there was some funding coming from UNICEF and UNESCO. So because of that, in some regions, the program could run in some regions. But after 2015, when the funding, maybe when the project, I always call it the project because every project has a beginning and an end. So after 2015, the government was supposed to continue from where this organization were supporting the practices, but that did not quite happen, or that did not happen. So because of that, what most of the initiatives that were begun with time, it continued to die out because of what? The lack of funding that was supposed to be given to maybe the special education officers to continue supporting teachers, providing training, and also other basic needs that could maybe they might be able to provide to the schools. It stopped. So one of the things that happened was that most of the special education teachers who were sent to the district had to look for what? An alternative, or most of them moved out of what? The field. Maybe they turn themselves into regular classroom teachers, or they have to what? Upgrade themselves and try to look for other jobs. So because of that, because of the lack of funding and no activity, they also have to what? Find an alternative, maybe an alternative, because of what? There was nothing coming to them for them to be able to function. And also, of course, another big problem has got to do with what? Infrastructure, whereby the idea is that we need funding, or we need financial support to be able to adapt the existing facilities, and also try to develop facilities that can be able to accommodate diversity. So, which is also one of the problems. And when you go to the field to talk to these implementers or the schools, this issue will also come out strongly, or will be able to come out. And because of the lack of funding, we also have a problem here, which is what? The teaching and learning materials. The special education teachers in the selected schools, they were sent to selected schools to be able to support or practice. And maybe one special education teacher will be assigned maybe about 10 schools. So they call it cluster of schools. So each person is assigned to cluster of schools. Already there's a problem with that model that they were using. But at least it was what? The beginning of what? We are at the beginning stages of the implementation. So it was a good initiative for them to what? Maybe have some people or maybe assign them to cluster of schools to be able to support. But in most countries, maybe for instance in Australia and also the UAE, it's a requirement that every school should have what? A special education teacher. But in our model, we try to assign them to a number of schools, maybe with the hope that what? Maybe after some time, more of them will be trained, and their numbers is going to increase. But that did not happen. So that was the only intervention that were given to the schools. So they were sent to the schools, or the special education teachers were sent to the schools without what? Any resources. So they were present in the schools, but nothing was given to them, nothing was given to the schools. So because of that, they couldn't really affect policies, although they were in the schools, but nothing much or no resource in terms of teaching and learning materials was given to them. And you know that in the Western world, inclusive education is driven by resources. And I think I'll come back to this issue to clarify how we can also implement inclusive education, or how we can think about our practice if we do not have the resources that these Western countries are having to implement the policies. Then there should be an alternative way for us to think about our practice. So another big problem has got to do with our understanding. Like I was talking about in the beginning, most people are Christians, or maybe they are Muslims, but not many people would identify themselves as being maybe they are traditionalists, or they believe in our cultural practices. But when somebody gives birth to a child with disability, the first thing that comes to their mind is their traditional understanding. So their traditional, although they are Christians or they are Muslims, but the traditional understanding of disability do not go away. It still stays. they still see disability from that perspective. So this kind of our understanding has impact on how teachers perceive them, how policymakers also perceive the individuals, also how other students also perceive these students with disability, and also the parents, because there are situations whereby parents do not sometimes they see, some parents will see it as a waste of money to take your child with disability to school or to support them. In the same way, teachers will see them as incapable, and whereby they are not going to support them. In the same way, there was a time whereby I was interviewing somebody from the special education headquarters, and they raised this issue that anytime they try to request for funding, they tell them, look, these people cannot help the country. So why should we waste money, or why should we waste money on their education? So so some of these responses will let you know that indeed, although we are thinking about inclusion, but our traditional understanding of disability, the onset of disability, and the capability of persons with disability also have impact on their teaching within the schools. We have a policy. There is the inclusive education policy, which was developed in 2015, and there are other education strategic plans which talk about the need for us to be able to implement inclusive education. But you notice that some of the provisions in those documents, I think we did not think about them, or I think we did not think about how we can be able to how we can contextualize those particular provisions, or how we can there are some best practices, like maybe we talk about differentiation. You talk about universal design for learning, and in most countries they use those particular terms. But within our context, we need to redefine those concepts, or we need to rethink how we are going to define those concepts before we can be able to say that yes, our policy or our inclusive policy is going towards this direction, child-friendly schools, or we are going to adopt universal design for learning. So you notice that we will have the policy, like in 2006, we developed the Persons with Disability Act. You find out that most of the provisions in that particular act, we are not implemented, or we've not been able to implement those particular provisions because of we did not really have a second look. We did not look at our system, or we did not look at our context and try to think about how we can adapt those provisions to make within our, so that whatever that we are going to implement will be supported by our context. So our policy is a little bit it's a little bit some of the provisions in the policies may not be feasible in our context. So I call it policy transplantation, copying the policy without thinking about how that particular policy is going to be implemented. And I pick some of these provisions from the inclusive education policy. So if you talk about the fact that you're going to implement inclusive education using maybe some principles such as universal design for learning, you can see clearly that maybe we do not really understand where that particular concept is coming from. Because in the US, when they think about this particular policy, they are thinking about technology. They are thinking about redesigning the physical environment to make it possible for some of these policies to be able to happen. So the teachers, maybe in the school, they were taught that we are going to use the principle of the universal design for learning, whereby you're going to use we are going to use technology and best practices to be able to support the students in the classroom. So when they go to the schools and those technologies is not there, so they have in a way they have they can justify that we do not have the resources, so we cannot teach them. But if we contextualize the policy, I think, or if you contextualize the policy, discuss it among ourselves to be able to understand how we are going to implement universal design for learning, then in that particular way, the teachers will have that understanding at the back of their mind with by knowing that, okay, this is how we are going to implement some of these best teaching practices in the school. But if they are the teachers are trained in the way that they are trained currently, always when they go to the field, they will tell you that we are told that what inclusion relies heavily on resources, and we don't have what the resources. And I try to pick out some of the key provisions in our inclusive education policy. You can see clearly that although it's been, let's say, 8 years since that policy was implemented, some of these things, some of these strategies, we are not following them, or we've not been able to achieve them. And these are some of the questions that we should ask ourselves. Why is it that we designed a policy? This is what we said, but in practice, we've said it in policy, but in practice, we are not doing that. This means that we need to have a second look, or we need to think about what we are going to do differently, or how we are going to think about our implementation of some of these policies. Sometimes it's good to follow the international trend. It's good to follow what other countries are doing, but I believe that maybe in Africa or in Ghana, for instance, we don't think about how we are going to implement some policies to make it feasible within our country. So like I said, recently, there's a book chapter that we are working on. And I do believe that instead of thinking about universal design for learning, I'm trying to propose that we need something like an African design for learning. An African design for learning will take into consideration the fact that our physical environment, it has not really been developed in such a way that persons with disabilities can have easy access to public places, to schools and everything. So if you think about universal design for learning, you are jumping a lot of steps, because in the US, before this particular term came into being, the physical environment has been taken care of in most instances before this policy came in. So in an African context, we also need to, if we are thinking about a policy like this, you can see clearly that we've not done the basics, which is looking at taking care of our physical environment before moving to into the classroom. So sometimes some policy will be problematic if you don't look at our system to make sure how some of the key principles, or how some of the principles in the policies could be implemented or could be changed to make it feasible within our context. Now let's think about some few years ago, you noticed that anytime in the West, for instance, in Australia, they invest a lot in the development of children with disability. The same thing applies to the UAE, whereby a lot of money goes into this particular policy. So if you don't have the resources, it will become very difficult for the policy to be implemented. Looking at how other countries are practicing the policy. Like you go to the US, you can see that there is somewhat a huge budget allocation given to the children or given to the schools to support the teaching of children with disabilities. But we do not have that. So because of that, you can see that maybe if you are thinking about implementing such a policy without the budget, or without the budget for it, we are not going to be successful. But if we are trying to follow the other countries who are making some progress with the implementation. But if you don't have the resources, in my personal view, I think that we are going to encounter problems implementing such a policy. So these are some of the key ingredients, or the key areas, or the key component of I'll call it the key ingredient, because if you don't have these particular if you don't have these particular indicators, it becomes very difficult for you to be successful when it comes to the implementation of inclusive education, the teaching materials, now technology, funding, allied health professionals. We don't need it's not only about the teacher development, but as I was saying, that in most countries, there is a requirement that a school is supposed to have a psychologist, a social worker, a school nurse, and a speech language pathologist who will be present within the school environment to support the teachers in the teaching. But you notice that in Ghana, we don't have it. What do we have? We only have the teachers. So this means that this is our strength, or in terms of this particular indicator, this is the strength that we have, that we can be able to capitalize on it in terms of practicing inclusive education. So in this particular strength, we need to look at how we can use our strength, which is what the teachers that we are developing. We need to think about an alternative ways through which we can be able to train teachers in such a way that they can be able to accommodate the teaching of children who are having disabilities. I do believe that we do not have to follow other countries, but we need to think about how we can be able to practice policy in our own way and not their way. Because if we follow their way, we will not have the resources to be able to practice inclusion. So I call it a low cost approach. That is what we should be thinking about as a country. What should be the low cost approach? The low cost approach is in such a way that we need to think about implementing inclusive education, training teachers in such a way that they maybe within our context, this is our approach, whereby we are not going to rely too much on resources, but we are going to rely on your expertise and also the community at the community level, what we have available. That is what we are going to fall on it. So because maybe if you are saying that, the best way to teach a child with autism is by giving the child maybe an iPad. The iPad costs maybe more than $7,000. And you can imagine that it becomes very difficult for, if you are waiting for the government to provide this, or you're waiting for parents to provide these particular devices, it will be very difficult for them to have it. So we should think about maybe we have a low-cost approach towards implementation of giving policies. Last year, as one of the projects that I did in Ghana was that I tried to look at how school leaders are supporting teachers to practice inclusive education. And I noticed that and I came up with a model, which I call it a heuristic inclusive education framework. For instance, when you look at leadership or leadership in education, they talk about the distribution role, the transaction role, and the instructional role of school leaders. So for instance, when it comes to transformation, you can see that they define transformation as the school leaders should be able to transform the school, come up with their own principles, come up with their own ideas on how they are going to manage the schools. But clearly, if you are training teachers or you're training leaders using these particular principles, you will see that it's not going to work. In the first place, maybe for instance, in Australia and most Western countries, it's not the Ministry of Education who recruit the teachers or who recruit for the school leaders. The leaders are recruited by the school. The school board will conduct the interview, and they are going to recruit the school leaders. So clearly, the school leaders are not although they are under the ministry, but they have the certain things that were considered before they were appointed at the school level, not at the ministry level. So they have some sort of an autonomy to bring up their own ideas, and even teacher recruitment and also all the allied health professionals who are working with the student are recruited by the school leader or the school principal who does all those recruitment, and not directly coming from the Ministry of Education. So because of that, they have autonomy. So because of that, they can come up with their own principles, their own practices. So in the same way, when it comes to our context, we need to think about some policies in this particular way. For instance, if you are what should be the transformational role of the school leaders? The transformational role should be about what the leader can do on their own, because in the first place, they are recruited by they are recruited maybe from the Ministry of Education, or they are recruited directly, so they are under them. Every policy, they have to follow everything maybe that the ministry is giving. So because of that, they can be able to play another role, and not the classical definition of a transformational leadership. So we have to think about within the schools, the individual teachers, the individual what they can do on their own, what they have control over it, and not what they do not have control over it. This comes back to the point of whereby maybe we borrow concepts without thinking about how we can adapt those concepts to suit our context. So in conclusion, we notice that yes, as a country, we need to define, or we need to be able to look at what our system, or we need to be able to look at what our country and what we can do on our own, rather than what following or looking at what other policies that have been developed elsewhere to maybe to formulate our own policies. We need to look at what our low-cost approach, our community system, what resources do we have, and also we need to tackle this issue of what traditional understanding of disability. If indeed we are following the maybe the narrow approach towards practicing inclusive education, we need to tackle this problem before we can create an equitable society for all individuals, for children with disability within our society. So this brings maybe this is the end of what my presentation, and maybe we can just have maybe some sort of conversation or discussion among ourselves. And so thanks for listening. And if you have any question, please feel free, and you can be able to share some ideas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maxwell Opoku, for this exciting and very interesting presentation. I think for me, it's very important when you talk about contextualizing our own policies to suit our local needs. And so now I'm going to allow us, the participants, to, if you have any question or comment or feedback, kindly raise a hand and I'll call you. And then you can please come in. We can take maybe the first two and then we'll go in those turns. So the first person is George Asamoah, and then after that, Judith.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you, Doc. Dealing with children with disability, especially autism, is quite difficult. I have 3 of them. I have 4 cases, 3 are autistic. So my question is, what advice do you have for parents with such challenges, especially at the family level, how to cope with such situations, given that we don't have the resources and the infrastructure in the country to handle at the national level? So that at the family level, what kind of advice would you give to parents who are in such situations? That's my question.
Okay. Should I answer or we go to the next one?
I wanted Judith to go on with her question and then you can.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon to you, Judith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Opoku, for your presentation. Can you briefly tell us about the UDO? I just want to know a little bit more about UDO, the framework and how it works. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll start with George's questions. It has got to do with what the kind of advice that we can give to parents who are having children with autism. One of the most difficult things in life is to have a child with disability. And in Australia, I used to run an after-school program for children who are having autism and other developmental disabilities. And sometimes when you talk to the parents, you can see some of the emotional problems, or some of the problems that they are going through, or some of the issues that they are going to through in their mind. So normally, one of the things I do is to I call it the hope, maybe the message of hope is not to discourage them, but try to motivate them, let them know that there is still life for their children, and once they get they participate in the sort of intervention program that you give to those particular children, there's still hope for them. You motivate them, you encourage them, and you try to let them understand that with the right support or their continuous assistance to these particular children, we can achieve some sort of optimal development. So normally these are the kind of messages, and we always try to raise their expectation and encourage them and let them always appreciate the small development or the small effort that the children are making. We try to motivate them as much as possible for them to be able to understand that although they have the particular or their disadvantage in a way, but there's still something that they can be able to do, which we have to work on that. And as you know, every child with autism will come up with one unique skill or a unique ability. So you try to address or direct the attention of the parent to that unique ability, and you try to, as much as possible, to utilize that sort of what unique ability to make sure that what we develop that particular skill in a positive way, that what that can they can also be independent and live within the society. So it's not all about the negatives, but there are positive stories that what we need to share, that the parents have to support in developing in the homes. And sometimes the problem will come within the society whereby, like I said, there's a traditional understanding, although the parents may be Christian or maybe Muslims or maybe what, but the traditional understanding of that particular condition have impact on them or have impact on how the child is being developed at the, but we just have to make sure that what we try to advise them that what it is not their fault, the condition just happened, so they have to do their best to be able to support these particular children and not to discourage them. And we always try to use not to maybe discuss their children to them in a negative way, but rather we try to open their mind. We try to let them see the other side of the child and not only the negative aspect of what that particular child. And also, I think Judith was asking about the universal design for learning. The universal design for learning is one of the teaching principles in inclusive education. So it started in the US. It came from construction. That's what they call it, universal design. So the idea was that in the US, somebody went to court that what the physical environment is not accessible to persons with disabilities. So because of that, what they did was that the person won the case. So this forced the government to try to make sure that what all physical environment has to be changed to make it accessible to persons with disabilities. So when this was successful, so there is an organization, they call it CAST, I've forgotten the full name. They came up with the name, then they are going to add learning to the universal design. That was what created to make sure that what our physical environment is what accessible to all of them. So they came up with some teaching principles, multiple means of representation, engagement, and also action. So under representation, the idea is that as teachers, they have to use multiple strategies or multiple media. Normally, the attention of CAST is mainly on technology, using technology to drive the learning of the child. So if you are using a paper to teach the child and the child is not understanding, use a video or use an iPad so that what the child can have different understanding. And also, for instance, engagement. Children with I know George will know this if he works with children with autism. After a few minutes, they disengage in particular activities. So in order to get them interested, there should be an engagement or something to be able to engage them to continue that particular activity. So because of that, as a teacher, you have to have an engagement strategy. And also the same thing applies to multiple means of expression. The child should be able to for instance, if the child is deaf and they cannot talk, they should be able to use sign language, or they should be able to express their learning in a different way. So this particular principle, you can see that clearly we are going to use technology, or we are going to use in one way or the other technology to drive some of these principles. But these particular principles are not available in the schools. But you see in our policy that we've written that we are going to use the principle of universal design for learning to support the teaching of children with disabilities. And clearly you see that we don't have the capacity. So we need to think about a different approach, an alternative approach to utilizing these particular principles within our education system. I think
okay.
The next question. Okay.
Yes, let me see the hands that are up. Kojo Opoku, Dr. Kojo Opoku, please come in.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation, Doc. So in your presentation, you made understand that most of our policies, it's like we are not ready for the policy, but they are there. But I see it as more of sometime futuristic to prepare for the resources to be able to implement those policies. So in this way, should we prepare the resources to be ready before we say that we are going for this policy? Or as it has been used, look like even the universal basic and compulsory education is since 1992, but it took some years before it was implemented. And even now, we cannot say that we are actually implementing it very as it should be. And so most of the policies I'm thinking is more of futuristic, and we are preparing resources toward the effective implementation of those policies. And now when it comes to inclusive education, so for example, if you, as you said, more, it usually depends on the resources available. If you look at Gallup, Ghana Accountability for Learning, this thing, you can see that even though the resources are not there, if you monitor the schools that are about over 10,000 schools that are in this Gallup, you can see that though the resources have not been there because the teachers in some way has gotten training in those areas, they are doing their own way of kind of improvising ways to do what is expected, though the resources and the technologies that are needed for it, they don't have it. But since the policy is there and they've gotten some training in that form, they are using any other means to make sure that at least they're able to get something out of it. So my question is, should we wait until we get our resources ready before we roll out those good policies? Or we can bring it now, let people expect that this is the way to go. This is the best practice. So you should work towards it. This is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We cannot wait. In the first, we cannot wait to get everything before we implement the policy. But sometimes there should be some guidelines. For instance, and I'm going to what you said reminded me of what happens in Australia. In every 10 years, they look at what the implementation of inclusive education called. They have a guidelines whereby all stakeholders will have to meet and discuss their progress. So let's ask ourselves, we've been doing this since 2003. Have we had, what is our plan? What kind of plan are we following? And based on what we are writing, are we achieving them? So sometimes, yes, it's good to have a good policies, but we need to have some guidelines. Where are we heading towards? What are the steps what steps are we taking to be able to achieve this? Yes, systems do correct itself. Sometimes you make mistakes and you come back to be able to correct it. But you and I know we are not seeing some of these practical steps. And this brings me back to who are the policy developers? Are we developing the policy ourselves as a country, or some people are developing the policy for us? If those people are developing the policy for us, they don't understand our system. They don't understand our system, and we should be able to take the lead in our policy development. Last year, I worked with the UNESCO on trying to bring out the African policy on early childhood education. And you can see clearly that when we have a consultative meeting with them, they don't understand the African system. They don't understand. So if these people are the ones leading our policies, you can see clearly that whatever they are going to bring into the system is not for us, or it becomes very difficult for us to be able to implement. So in so doing, you can see that we will not be making any progress. So as a people, I think we have to use our own expertise, our own people, we need to think about what we can do as a people. And with time, we can make mistakes, and the system can correct itself, and we can be able to improve it ourselves. But if we leave to some people to develop for us, I think we in the first place, we set ourselves for challenges or for future challenges, which can make it very difficult for us to correct itself. Let's look at the disability policy. It was the first draft came out in 2006. So we should ask ourselves, what has been the progress? So what are we doing about it? So it means that clearly, probably there was not much something went wrong right from the beginning, which has made it very difficult for us to correct it since 2006. The same thing applies to what most of our policies that we are implementing. So my response to your question is that what our people should be involved. We understand our system. We went to school in Ghana. We understand our system. We understand what we are capable of doing, what we can do and what we cannot do. And once we define it ourselves, we do the policy ourselves. I think that is the best way for us to begin the dialogue on what maybe having a policy that can impact on what the life of what our people.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Opoku, do you have any follow-up, or I should move to James Ofori?
Yes, we just move to other people.
Okay, thank you. So James, please come in.
Thank you very much, Prof. For the sonorous presentation on disability. It must be known to everyone on this earth that any of us can become disabled at any time. So any policy to deal with disability must be a very urgent one and must be taken seriously. In principle, we feel like we were doing the best, but we are still not doing anything in practice. So I want to suggest, if I had the power, I would suggest to the powers that be that at least 0.5% of our GDP should be allocated towards disability policies in Ghana, because any one of us can have a child who will be disabled and will need a special help. Parents who have disabled children are greatly affected economically. Some could not leave the child and go to work, and it's affecting them economically. And because of that, it also affects other children who are disabled. So I think it is time we also think about those of us who are not disabled. We can also become disabled at any time by any means. So it is timely that we are having this conversation together. For me, as a policy student, I believe that I can begin to play my role by dedicating my life as a disability advocate to support those who have disability issues. I think together we can all do our best to make sure this policy that we already have, but is dormant, is activated for the good of society. I believe that disabled people have a lot to contribute. If we help them, they can contribute their quota towards the development of any society. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your insight and also for your comment. And in following up with what you said, you know that in the US, they took the issue of disability serious when Franklin Roosevelt became disabled himself. That is when they began to rethink about what the welfare of what, and he himself became an advocate, whereby a lot of resources was channeled into that. And our system is in such a way that our understanding and also sometimes some of our practices do not permit that. And I will say that it's very expensive policy when it comes to supporting maybe individuals with disabilities. It's very expensive, even the device that they are using. So it requires a lot of commitment. But sometimes I always have a problem in terms when every policy is driven externally. We do not own the policy ourselves, or we do not own the policy ourselves. And you can see that clearly most of the initiative in the disability did not come from us, or it did not come from what? It was not engineered internally, it was engineered outside. And most of the times, most people outside do not understand us, or they try to put what they think is best. But if we ourselves take the lead or take the initiative ourselves as a people, I do believe that we can be able to come up with an initiative that can be long-lasting, that can have long-lasting impact, and it will have a sustainable impact in the life of individuals within our society.
Thank you very much. Are there any more comments or questions? We have about 3 minutes, and let me see. Okay, so let's see if someone else will come in. But I was wondering if you could touch on a bit about this traditional conception, of disability and the extent to which even the policy itself, is culprits. Like how do we define disability and how does that affect the kind of policies and interventions that we provide these individuals?
Traditionally, when you look at in our traditions, for instance, when somebody gives birth to a child with disability, our understanding is that maybe they've done something, or maybe somebody has done something to that person. Here in the UAE, they have the same understanding whereby they do not think that God will create a child with disability a child that way, but rather somebody in the community caused it. So whenever if we believe that somebody caused it, then we can solve it, which brings the idea of the cure and not the rehabilitation. So rehabilitation takes in disability, we always talk about early intervention. So whenever a parent have a child with disability, in the first 5-6 years, they are not thinking about rehabilitation. They are thinking about solution, a cure for that particular condition. So because of that, not knowing that from all that period, they are wasting time, they are wasting precious time. The time that the child is supposed to be in a program whereby they will support it. The child maybe will be maybe moved from one church to the other, going to one traditionalist to the other, visiting different people. So because of that, it delays the development of the child, or it delays the development of that particular individual. So in the same way, those who are in leadership positions, they also come from our communities. They also come from they are also within our communities. So in one way or the other, they share some of these perspectives. So when they come to implementation of policies, they are not going to, they will not be keen to be able to support that, because sometimes some of these practices also inform their thinking and their judgment. For instance, I collected some data from the North, I think in 2016, about how they are allocating the Disability Common Fund to the children with disability, to the individuals with disabilities. And I found out that sometimes the finance officers and the district executives do not release the money. And their argument is that, what will they do with that? It's just that they are going to waste the money. So if you have somebody who thinks like that, you should clearly let you know that they are looking at the deficit side and not the capabilities or what they are capable of doing. So sometimes all these the traditional practice and all that, although in principle we may have a national policy, or maybe a national policy to create an equitable society, but the people who we appoint, or the people who are expected to make key decisions, also think about the deficit side of the disabilities and not what the positives or what they can contribute within our society. So this is how the traditional perspective also influence our judgment and also the development of our children with disabilities.
Thank you very much, Dr. Opoku. We will take the last question from, was it Esther? Let me see.
I think maybe it's James or something like that.
Yeah, Sandra Chikata.
Okay, so I joined late, but I still want to make a little suggestion, or I don't know if it's a question. And when we talk about disability, basically, it looks like we look at the physical disability. My suggestion is, if the policymakers or whoever, can we consider this learning disability as well, if it is possible? I work in international schools, the American and the British. And when it comes to learning disability, they really consider it. Let me give an example. In our Ghanaian society, when a child is going to write BEC, there's nothing like accommodation for children with learning disability. Some example, the dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyslexia, they are in the same classroom with people with a high IQ, which I feel it's not helping them. They have the ability, but because they came in with a disability that it's not physical, there are no accommodation for them and it doesn't help them as well. we now categorize them as they don't know anything, like they are not pulling their weight, they are low learners, which I think that if the policymakers consider those people, they would create a policy to help them as a whole. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes.
Thank you, Sandra. And Dr. Opoku, please, and because of time, let me allow the three others who have raised their hands to quickly come in with their questions, and you can take the four together as the last questions. So in that order, we'll start with Nora, then Aisha, and then James. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. So I want to ask, in terms of inclusive education, how do you classify a child or a disabled child? What is the definition? Is it based on the biological age, or is based on the what they exhibit? I want to contextualizing it within the African setting. Thank you.
Thank you. Aisha, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. My contribution is this. As a Ghanaian and somebody who has also been so much involved in some of these policies, the development of some of these policies, like the inclusive education policy, what I'm thinking is that, yes, you've raised the issue that who are the writers of these policies? In most cases, there are some Ghanaians with other foreign backings. So at the end of the day, it's the white person's eyes that they use in developing some of these policies. They could be good, but at the end of the day, we do not have the resources. So it's more frustrating to have a beautiful resource, a beautiful policy that is not implemented than not having one at all. Then my other issue is, this is not the first policy we've ever had for persons with disability. If you look at those that have been done in the past concerning rehabilitation, you notice that, yes, we've got some rehabilitation centers, which is good, but at the end of the day, what are they doing? How many persons with disabilities are they gainfully training to go out and get good jobs to do? Those are my concerns. The transition aspects. At the end of the day, education is meant to develop us in so many areas, but work is one of the most important reasons why we go to school. We need a cash in our pocket. Whilst we are talking about these policies, what are we doing on the job side? So that even the few people that have gone through the special schools and finally made it into the tertiary institutions or other institutions, where are the jobs for them? Are we discussing anything about where they transition to? What is happening to them? Those are the areas that I think we need to also begin to look at. So that if we have a few persons with disabilities who are educated, we need to see them gainfully employed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. The last one from James Adiho.
Thank you very much. Prof, you said you went to Ministry of Education, the Special Education Unit. In the course of your interview, you said they responded, said that, well, these people, put it that way, people with disability will not be of any benefit to us. Hence, there's no need spending so much on them. As a policy maker, what is your take on such issue? Maybe you met people at the lower level. I don't know if you went up to even meet the minister or people at the helm of affairs. What would be some of your take on this issue? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. What I said was that they raised the issue of what funding. It did not come from the person who works at the special education but they were saying that anytime as a department or as a agency, anytime they request for budget, they do not get what they want. And these are some of the feedback that they get from people who are within the ministry and not the agency, but the agency themselves, because they are there to advocate for the individuals who are having disabilities. But all come back to what we've not prioritized that as an important, maybe important really within the education system. All these come back to the fact, and I think Aisha talked about the issue because we are not seeing the tangible benefits, or we are not seeing the benefit of what the school system. So people do not feel that what we have to be able to invest in that. And because I'll combine James and Aisha's questions and address this particular point, you can see that when you go to the special school system, I always ask myself one simple question: when are these children going to graduate? And you can see clearly that they will not be able to give you an answer. So because of that, it becomes very difficult for you to convince a policymaker that what they should continue to invest money, because we don't see an end to this kind of the money that we are investing in the education system. The US came up with a very good way of solving this problem. So because they came up with the age that the government will support the education of children with disability up to the age of 21. So within this particular age, we know clearly that right from the beginning, the child has up to the funding from the federal government up to the age of 21. After that, they have to transition. No matter how you train the person, the child has to transition, because the government will no longer support that particular individual. So they must come up with a plan to make sure that by the period, or by the time the child gets to 21 years, they've acquired the requisite competencies for them to transition into an adult program. So because of that, there is always an outflow. We can see that some people are coming into the program and they are leaving. Now, if you go to a special school and you see that some of the students are 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, there's a big problem with such a particular system. And in most countries, you will not see that, because they have a transition program, a plan that the child will come to the school and they will have an exit for other people to also come in and receive some training. So if we do not have any transition, it becomes very difficult for policymakers to continue investing money into a system whereby there's no transition, and the children are in the school setting. So because of that, they may see it as not a wealthy investment, because we are not seeing anything, and that will reflect. And I do believe that a good special education system will reflect in a number of children who are able to have access to job. So if you have a system whereby you're not graduating your students, in a way you're going to encounter some of these problems whereby the policymakers will question the relevance of our programs. So in some situations, our special schools or our special school system maybe is also part of the problem, whereby they are not helping us come up with a very good system whereby some of the children can transition from the program. So every year, the government, maybe somebody from the Ministry of Education, will see the same list, maybe for 10 years, the same people that you are bringing to look for funding. So to them, they will perceive this as maybe not a fruitful venture for them to be investing money in that. So we need to look at how we can maybe reform our special school system, and also we should have a transition plan that there should be an end. And sometimes that is why sometimes some of the parents do not go back to the school to take their children again, because they see it as a lifelong, because as soon as the child gets admitted into the special school system, there's no transition. So the child is going to be there maybe for the rest of their life. And that shouldn't happen in practice. In practice, there should be an end point, and there should always be a transition point for us to be able to show to our policymakers that indeed these are the people who are coming into the program, and those are the ones who are exiting, and that will encourage them to be able to continue to invest money, or to invest resources into the education of our children who are having disabilities. And I think Nura also said something about how should we teach children with disabilities, whether based on age or based on their ability. My take is that the age will deceive you if you are saying that you're going to teach them based on their age. Sometimes when you look at children with let's say autism or intellectual disability, when you read their medical reports, they will tell you that this child is, let's say, 10 years old, but they have maybe a brain of a 5-year-old, which means that although the person is 10 years old, but in terms of their ability, is maybe they are they have the ability of a 5-year-old. So that should be our focus. What will a 5-year-old learn? That is what we have to give to that particular person. But we do not understand the children in this particular way. For instance, maybe in terms of age, by 10 years old, maybe they're in primary 4. We want to teach all of them as maybe to be able to participate in activities in the primary 4 class. But sometimes that is not what they need. We need to go back to look at to consider their mental capacity. What are they capable of doing? That is what they should be able to they should be given. And I think I'll come to the first question in terms of what the learning disability. And those children with learning disabilities constitute the biggest disability groups. They are the biggest because we have adaptive children who fall in the same category, and also all the cognitive disabilities, autism, intellectual disability, Down syndrome, and all those children, you can see that they will all share some sort of a learning sometimes there's a debate whether it's learning disability or learning difficulty or specific learning disability, but you can see that all these particular groups also share the same characteristics. So because of that, sometimes those who do not come up with any physical disabilities, maybe people try to the teachers we don't have any intervention in place. In most, maybe in most school systems, we have the remedial system, whereby we call remediation. The remediation is in such a way that the child should be given additional intervention or additional support within the school system, so that if they have a problem with retention, there should be a program for them whereby some sort of intervention should be given to them for them to be able to regain, or for them to develop their mathematical skills, their reading or writing skills. But our system, we are not yet there. But I do believe that maybe with time and in most countries, they have a different classroom or a remedial session for them alone, whereby they do take those particular classes that will help them to be able to develop their skills. But our system is based on merit, and whether you are in or you are out. But sometimes we are losing maybe some people with some students with skills because of maybe they are struggling within the school system. We are not maybe carrying them along, but the teachers would rather leave them behind, and they are not able to maybe to make any impact, or they are not able to make any impact in their life. So these are some of the system problems that probably we need to be able to address when we are thinking of developing our policies. We need to look at this particular system, so that it can be able to, or we can be able to come up with alternative program or parallel programs for these particular children within the school system. I believe I've been able to maybe respond to each of the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maxwell Opoku, for your submission and for this very interesting presentation, and to the participants also for the conversation. I think that we've had a very insightful one. So I guess the very normal policy problems that we have in the country are always there: the funding, the implementation, and then, of course, access to resources and the logistics of all of that. But I think the key takeaway is a need to contextualize our policies, right? Looking at the particular kinds of reforms, and then also, like you're talking about, having a transition system in the school system for these disabled people. So on that note, I'll say a very big thank you. I think some people would want to get in touch with you. I'm not sure if you would like to share your email here on the chat. Otherwise, yeah. So maybe we can do that now, or before we give me a moment, and let me do that before I end, just to be sure. Yeah, so I've done that. So thank you again, everyone. Our next seminar is in 2 weeks, and we look forward to having all of you. And thank you very much, Dr. Maxwell Opoku, for your presentation. And we hope that we can continue the conversation with individuals who are interested in the subject, but also probably we can have you again in one of our sessions later on. Thank you, and have a very...
You're welcome. And yes. Have a good day.
All right, thank you.